How come every time we turn around, someone somewhere in Australia is calling for more restrictions on gun ownership and shooting sports and everything else? And we need more restrictions. At the same time, almost weekly for 25 years, the same people have been in the media spouting that Australia has the best gun laws in the world. I sort of don't get it. And we get a lot of members asking us, how come that? And I want to try and address that today because it makes no sense, at least to me. If we got the best gun laws in the world, even though no other country in the world's adopted them in that 25 years, including New Zealand, which has just updated its laws, has taken a different tack. But even with that said, if we got the best gun laws in the world, how come you want to change them all the time? And every change wants to take away from our ability to own and use them safely. I'd say there's three major reasons why. First is there is a tiny but extremely well-funded group of anti-gun extremists, and they will never rest until you aren't even allowed to have a picture of a gun. You know, they'd like to have them banned from movies or whatever else. And they have a point of view, but they're not in and of themselves the cause of this push. You know, it's just not that on its own at all. You've also got politicians and political parties that see that the media bias that's out there, because most reporters are in a city based, they don't understand firearms, they don't understand why people would want them and use them legitimately, so they just see crime, firearms in their mind. So the politicians and the political parties understand that media bias, and they always play to the media. So whenever a politician sees their polls sliding, their numbers sliding, they are very likely to say, time for another gun scare. And we'll ban this and do this, and it'll increase public safety. The catch call for almost anything, especially we would have seen over the last few years, that one. So that's another factor. But it's not the only factor, and I don't think it's even the biggest factor. The biggest single factor is actually, and the most powerful driver potentially, is money. Money? You know, what's that got to do with it? Well, there's an old saying about chase the money, and you see a lot of things. In 1996, when Australia's gun laws were radically changed and made very restrictive, it was agreed by everyone, be that in police circles, media circles, government regulator circles, everyone, in quotation marks, agreed that with all these changes, shooting as a hobby would become unacceptable socially, and that most people would stop shooting, stop owning guns. And you know what? They were sort of right for a little while, and that shrunk away. And they thought, well, what'll happen is over time, the remaining small group of shooters will age off and die, and we won't have a problem. So these really complex regulations we've got can be administered quite easily by very few people, and they didn't have to throw money at it. So follow the money. But what has happened in reality is the exact opposite of what they expected, because a whole new generation of people realized what a safe, interesting, and exacting sport shooting is. And a lot more farmers have realized how effective firearms are in managing pest animals, which are getting out of hand in Australia, and environmental damage and controlling issues on farms. So firearms ownership in Australia has taken off. And we're now at a point with some 1.2 million licensed people who have about 3.5 million licensed firearms. And the powers that be are in shock. They're like, the bureaucrats are in shock. How did this happen? The people administering are in shock. How did this happen? The politicians are going, but no one shoots. The media's going, but surely, who wants to own a gun? Who needs a gun? And so they don't get it. And yet it's happening. It's happening precisely because it's a great sport. It's safe. It's effective. It's a great way to teach responsibility. And so people have embraced it. We've seen a society that has regulated things more and more. So a lot of younger people realize, hey, I've got to jump through some regulatory hoops, and they're willing to do that. And so it's grown in spite of it to these levels. Now, as they say in the movies, a funny thing happened on the way to the elimination of gun ownership. And what happened was people realizing that what a great sport it was and everything else, and it took off. And it took off even more recently during COVID, because what more COVID-friendly sport is there than that? And so people went through the proper training, did safety training, got their licenses, everything else. And the politicians, but more so the bureaucrats, have freaked out because their registries or their weapons regulators are in a shambles because they have refused to spend money on them over the years. For the last 25 years, governments across Australia have managed to take the money from registry fees for PTAs and for licenses, and it's like money for jam to them. So they've taken that money, but in nearly every state's case, they have put that into general revenue. They do not feed it back into those registries. So the registries have been unable to update, modernize, digitalize, everything else. And at the same time, you've got this growing number of people shooting and being regulated, and they can't keep up. So you've got this constant mess that we're seeing over and over that causes all sorts of arguments and everything else with people like Shooters Union, who are sitting in government panels both at state levels around the country and federal level, where we're trying to work with police ministers or regulators and things. And simply put, follow the money. They don't want to spend the money. They're going to have to spend tens of millions of dollars in each state to bring these things up to par. What's a better solution? So some bright spark bureaucrat goes, hey, I got a much better solution. We just tighten up the regulations more to make it harder to get a license. And guess what? Maybe we'll go from 1.2 million shooters down to 800,000 or 600,000. And in your state, like Queensland, for example, you go from 220,000, maybe by tightening up the fit and proper or something that will make zero difference to public safety, which is already excellent, you'll be able to reduce the number down to, say, 180,000 or 150,000. There's a win because you don't have to spend as much money doing it. So realistically, if you put those three things together, you've almost got a perfect storm for what's happening in Australia and what you're seeing. You put together the anti-gun extremist groups, which are the smallest minority, a media that goes along with them, and the politicians and political parties who make hay when the polls are in slide by picking some crime that would not be affected by any gun law, and then harping on that for more regulation and saying, look, aren't we great? We're operating public safety to try and get votes. And sadly, it's getting worse by the month for the 1.2 million shooters across Australia. And unfortunately, a lot of shooters, we don't want to get politically involved. We don't want to get politically active. We just want to go to the range. And just like as if we were playing golf or anything else. But we're being forced into being political. And so the bottom line is this. If you just continue to ignore it all, oh, I don't care, politicians don't listen, no one listens, which is a common attitude, you may want to think about fishing instead. Take that up instead of shooting. Now, maybe you don't want to take up fishing because I hear some of the animal lib groups are coming after fishing next. So that could be even worse. Well, there's really two simple steps that you could follow to try and make a difference. And they do make a difference. Shooters Union have been doing this for over 20 years. We know some things that work and things that don't. And two simple things. Contact your local state politician. Doesn't have to be a minister or anything, just your local member. And let her or him know politely and nicely just how you feel about being used as a political tool every time there's a slide in their polls. And that you don't want to be used that way. And if they choose to support new measures that restrict you in your activities for no good reason, then you are going to not only A, not vote for them, but B, actively vote to campaign against them. Note, yelling and ranting does not help. Do not go in there and abuse them. In most cases, they don't have much of an opinion on it. And so if you go in there rationally and calmly and just say, hey, this is what I do. Secondly, if you're a member of a local shooting club, which many people watching this would be, get together with the guys or girls in your club and invite that same local state member down when you're having a shoot and get them to meet some of the members, maybe even have a shot, if they haven't, give it a go, whatever, but get them down to meet some of the same people. Put a barbecue on, make it interesting. Don't let your members rant and yell at them. Be nice, but be firm and say, any more restrictions will result. We're not going to vote for anyone, we don't care what party it is, who votes for these restrictions. You do that around the country and you will see a lessening of some of these things, because politicians, they're a bit predatory. They pick on the weakest link. And if they think you're not going to complain, if they think you're not going to be active, guess what? It's the old story, squeaky wheel gets the grease. So be squeaky. You need to be squeaky. And yet I hear people out there, a lot of you watching this go, none of that'll make a difference because you contacted a politician once and the politician didn't listen to you, didn't respond to your letter or whatever. So what? Even if they don't respond, they know you got it. Their office knows you got it. And they get 100 letters and they go, ooh, someone's irritated. And they'll never admit it in public. And in public, they'll tell you, oh, yes, we support your shooting, or we do this, or we do that. And yet they'll vote for these bills. So you've got to be very clear in what you want from them. If you, Mr. Jones or Mrs. Jones or Mrs. Jones, vote for this, I won't be voting for you and I'll be campaigning against it. And I'll give you one example of this making a difference. Our own local politician, one of our members, took him to a range and he tried sporting clays. Not only did he enjoy it, he's now an active sporting clay shooter, went and got his license, everything else, and became a life member of Shooters Union. Now, what a great outcome. So he's got a much more balanced view about gun laws when this stuff comes up in Parliament. Now, there's only one of me, but there's tens of thousands of members, and there's 1.2 million of us that shoot firearms and use them safely around Australia. Surely to goodness, even if 10% of us went out and did that, they will start taking notice. We've been doing this for more than 20 years. It does make a difference. The problem is it doesn't make a difference when one person does it, but it does make a difference when hundreds or thousands of people do it.